There is a strange disappointment that often arrives when a person begins to grow mentally stronger. We imagine strength as a shield against suffering, a quiet victory over fear, a clearer path through life's confusion. Yet few speak of the other consequence. As the mind becomes more disciplined, more honest with itself, the world around it begins to look different. The conversations that once felt meaningful may suddenly seem shallow. The habits people defend begin to reveal themselves as excuses. The complaints that once earned sympathy start to sound like prisons built by choice rather than circumstance. It is not that people become worse than they were before. It is that your eyes become less willing to accept comforting illusions. Mental strength does not merely change how you respond to life. It changes what you notice. You begin to see how fear disguises itself as caution, how pride disguises itself as confidence, and how weakness often hides behind endless explanations. The same people remain before you, yet they appear transformed because the lens through which you view them is no longer the same. And perhaps the most unsettling discovery is that this new vision does not only expose others, it exposes the parts of yourself that once lived comfortably in the dark. Most people desire mental strength for what they believe it will give them. They imagine a calmer mind, greater confidence, freedom from fear, and the ability to endure hardship without being crushed by it. Strength appears from a distance to be an entirely desirable thing. It seems like a treasure with no burden attached to it. Yet many discover, after pursuing it seriously, that mental strength carries a cost few people mention. The cost is not found in the effort required to build it. Most expect discipline to be difficult. Most understand that growth demands sacrifice. The hidden cost emerges later, when the mind begins to see the world differently than it once did. There is a comfort in living among assumptions that everyone around us shares. We move through life accepting certain explanations, certain habits, and certain ways of thinking simply because they are familiar. We do not question them deeply because they form the atmosphere in which we live. Like a person who has spent years in a dimly lit room, we grow accustomed to the shadows and stop noticing them. Mental strength begins with honesty. Not honesty directed at others, but honesty directed at oneself. A person starts examining his fears instead of defending them. He begins questioning his excuses rather than decorating them with clever language. He learns to look at failure without immediately searching for someone else to blame. Such habits seem small at first, but they gradually alter the entire structure of the mind. Once this process begins, it becomes difficult to stop. A person who has learned to question his own assumptions often finds himself questioning the assumptions of the world around him as well. Things that once appeared reasonable begin to seem strange. Behaviors that were once overlooked become impossible to ignore. A complaint that once sounded justified may suddenly reveal itself as a refusal to take responsibility. A boast that once sounded impressive may reveal a deep insecurity beneath it. A person's confidence may turn out to be nothing more than stubbornness, wearing a respectable disguise. The difficulty is not that these things suddenly come into existence. They were always there. The difference is that the stronger mind becomes less willing to participate in comforting illusions. This can create a quiet sense of distance between oneself and others. Conversations that once felt engaging may begin to feel repetitive. One notices how often people speak about changing their lives while carefully protecting the habits that prevent change. One notices how frequently individuals ask for solutions, when what they truly seek is confirmation that they need not change at all. There is nothing particularly pleasant about such discoveries. In fact, they can be deeply disappointing. The world often appears simpler before a person learns to see these contradictions. Ignorance carries many burdens, but it also carries certain comforts. The mentally stronger individual must therefore wrestle with a peculiar temptation. Having recognized weaknesses in others, he may begin to imagine himself superior. This is perhaps one of the greatest dangers that accompanies strength, for the ability to see clearly does not guarantee the ability to judge fairly. The same honesty that reveals the flaws of others must continue revealing one's own flaws as well. Otherwise, mental strength becomes little more than pride wearing the mask of wisdom. The disciplined person is not the one who discovers weakness everywhere except within himself. He is the one who realizes that the very faults he observes in others often exist within his own nature, though perhaps in different forms. This realization prevents strength from becoming arrogance. It reminds a person that human beings are far more alike than they wish to believe. The excuses may differ. The fears may wear different costumes. The failures may emerge in different circumstances. Yet beneath these differences lies the same struggle between comfort and courage, between self-deception and truth, between the easier path and the better one. One of the less celebrated effects of mental strength is that it changes the way a person listens. The words spoken by others remain the same, yet something within the listener has changed. What once sounded convincing may now sound hollow. What once appeared reasonable may now reveal itself as an excuse carefully dressed in respectable language. Most excuses do not announce themselves as excuses. If they did, they would possess very little power. Few people wake in the morning and consciously decide to avoid responsibility. The human mind is far more subtle than that. It has a remarkable ability to transform weakness into something that appears sensible, even noble. We become skilled at explaining our failures in ways that protect our pride while preserving our comfort. A mentally weak person often accepts these explanations without examination, both in himself and in others. He hears a reason and assumes it is the truth. He sees an obstacle and assumes it is the cause of defeat. He rarely asks whether the obstacle was truly insurmountable, or whether it merely provided a convenient place to stop trying. Mental strength begins to alter this habit. The stronger mind develops a willingness to look beyond the first explanation offered. It understands that human beings are not always dishonest with others, but they are frequently dishonest with themselves. The most convincing excuses are often those that have been repeated so many times that they are mistaken for facts. Consider how often fear disguises itself as practicality. A person may claim that his dreams are unrealistic, that the risks are too great, or that the timing is not right. These statements may contain some truth, yet beneath them there may exist a simpler reality. He is afraid. The mind, unwilling to admit this openly, constructs a more acceptable explanation. The same pattern appears in countless forms. Laziness presents itself as patience. Indecision presents itself as careful planning. Envy presents itself as criticism. Pride presents itself as self-respect. The human heart possesses an extraordinary talent for giving its weaknesses new names. As mental strength grows, these disguises become easier to recognize. Not because the stronger person gains some mystical insight, but because he has spent time uncovering similar disguises within himself. He remembers the excuses he once believed. He remembers the stories he told himself to avoid discomfort. Having encountered these habits in his own mind, he begins to recognize them elsewhere. This recognition can be unsettling. It becomes difficult to participate in conversations exactly as before. One notices how often people speak about what they desire while avoiding the sacrifices necessary to obtain it. One notices how frequently blame is directed outward rather than inward. Circumstances, luck, society, other people. Everything becomes responsible except the individual himself. Yet the mentally strong person must exercise caution. Seeing through excuses is not the same as understanding every person's struggle. There is a danger in believing that every failure results from weakness, or that every obstacle can be conquered through sheer determination. Reality is more complicated than that. Some burdens are genuinely heavy, some wounds run deep, some circumstances are undeniably difficult. Mental strength does not require a person to become harsh or cynical. It does not demand that compassion be abandoned in favor of judgment. Rather, it teaches a person to distinguish between genuine hardship and self-imposed limitation. The difference is important because excuses often flourish where this distinction is ignored. When every obstacle is treated as proof of impossibility, growth becomes impossible. When every difficulty is interpreted as a reason to surrender, potential remains forever unrealized. Strong minds learn to ask different questions. Instead of asking, "Why can't this be done?" they ask, "What would be required to do it?" Instead of asking, "Who is responsible for my situation?" they ask, "What responsibility belongs to me?" Instead of seeking explanations that preserve comfort, they seek truths that produce growth. This habit gradually changes how people are perceived. The stronger mind begins to notice that many limitations are maintained not by external forces but by internal agreements. Individuals often become prisoners of beliefs they have accepted without examination. They repeat the same stories, defend the same fears, and protect the same weaknesses while wondering why nothing changes. What appears from the outside to be a lack of opportunity is often a lack of courage. What appears to be bad luck is sometimes the consequence of repeated avoidance. What appears to be impossibility may simply be a boundary that has never been challenged. There comes a moment in personal growth that few people anticipate. It is not marked by a dramatic achievement, a public victory, or some visible transformation that others immediately recognize. Instead, it arrives quietly. The world appears unchanged. The same people occupy the same places in your life. The same conversations continue to occur, yet something feels different. The difference lies not in them, but in the eyes through which you now see them. Most relationships are formed between people who share similar assumptions about life. They laugh at the same things, complain about the same problems, pursue the same comforts, and avoid the same discomforts. This creates a sense of familiarity that feels natural and secure. We rarely stop to question whether these shared habits are helping us grow or merely helping us remain comfortable. As mental strength develops, that comfort begins to weaken. The stronger mind becomes less interested in appearances and more interested in reality. It starts paying attention to motives rather than words, patterns rather than promises, actions rather than intentions. This shift is subtle at first, but its effects can be profound. A friend who once seemed ambitious may suddenly appear trapped in endless talk and little action. A person who always presented himself as confident may reveal signs of insecurity hidden beneath constant self-promotion. Someone who frequently criticized others may begin to look less like a wise observer and more like an individual avoiding his own shortcomings. The strange thing is that these people have not necessarily changed. Their habits, attitudes, and behaviors may have been present all along. What has changed is your ability to notice them. Growth often functions like a light being turned on in a familiar room. The furniture remains where it has always been, but details that were once hidden become impossible to ignore. This experience can create a feeling of confusion. Human beings naturally expect growth to bring greater connection, greater understanding, and greater harmony with those around them. Yet there are times when growth initially produces the opposite effect. The stronger your perception becomes, the harder it may be to pretend that certain things do not exist. You begin noticing how often people say they want change, while resisting every demand that change requires. You notice how frequently complaints are repeated without any genuine attempt at improvement. You observe individuals who seem more committed to defending their limitations than overcoming them. There is often a temptation to become frustrated by these discoveries. One may wonder why others cannot see what appears so obvious. One may become impatient with behaviors that once seemed normal. Yet such frustration usually reveals a misunderstanding of human nature. People do not cling to their weaknesses because they enjoy suffering. They cling to them because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. Even painful habits can become comfortable when they are known. The unknown, by contrast, carries risks. Growth requires a person to leave behind explanations, identities, and patterns that may have provided security for many years. Mental strength allows you to see this struggle more clearly. It reveals not only the weakness itself, but also the fear that often sustains it. The person making excuses may be protecting himself from failure. The person avoiding responsibility may be protecting himself from shame. The person refusing to grow may be protecting himself from disappointment. Understanding this does not make the behavior less harmful, but it does make it more understandable. It reminds us that behind many frustrating actions lies a deeply human desire for safety. Another surprising consequence of growth is that familiar conversations may begin to feel different. Topics that once consumed hours of attention may lose their appeal. Endless gossip, repeated complaints, and superficial distractions can start to feel strangely empty. This is not because you have become incapable of enjoying simple interactions. Rather, your mind has developed a greater appetite for substance. You begin searching for honesty where you once accepted performance. You seek depth where you once accepted entertainment. You become more interested in truth than in agreement. This naturally changes the way you engage with others. Some relationships adapt to this change. They deepen, becoming more authentic and meaningful. Others struggle because they were built upon habits that can no longer satisfy the person you are becoming. The difference can be difficult to accept, because growth does not merely alter your goals or your behavior. It alters the lens through which every relationship is viewed. The familiar faces remain before you, yet they seem transformed because the standards by which you understand them are no longer the same. The qualities you once admired may lose their importance. The flaws you once overlooked may become impossible to ignore. The assumptions you once shared may begin to feel foreign. One of the most delicate challenges that accompanies mental strength is learning the difference between awareness and judgment. At first glance, the distinction appears simple, yet many who begin to see the world more clearly discover how easily one can be mistaken for the other. As a person develops greater discipline, honesty, and self-control, he often becomes more observant. He notices patterns in behavior that once escaped his attention. He recognizes contradictions between what people say and what they do. He begins to see how fear influences decisions, how pride influences conversations, and how insecurity influences countless actions that appear ordinary on the surface. This increased awareness can be valuable. Without it, growth remains shallow. A person cannot understand reality while refusing to look at it carefully. The ability to observe human nature honestly is part of what allows wisdom to develop. Yet the very gift of awareness carries a hidden danger. The danger appears when observation transforms into condemnation. Many people assume that because they have identified a weakness, they have earned the right to stand above it. The moment they recognize fear in another person, they begin to feel courageous. The moment they notice someone's pride, they begin to feel humble. The moment they see another person's self-deception, they imagine themselves free from deception. Human nature possesses a curious tendency to convert insight into superiority. We discover a fault and immediately place ourselves on the opposite side of it. We see another person's failure and unconsciously treat it as evidence of our own virtue. This illusion is particularly dangerous because it often disguises itself as wisdom. The individual believes he is simply seeing reality clearly when, in truth, he has begun constructing a more flattering image of himself. Mental strength does not eliminate this temptation. In some respects, it increases it. The more accurately a person understands certain truths, the easier it becomes to overestimate his own position. Knowledge can produce humility, but it can also produce pride. Awareness can create compassion, but it can also create judgment. The difference lies in what happens after the observation is made. Awareness says, "I see this weakness." Judgment says, "Because I see it, I am better than the person who possesses it." The first statement may be true. The second rarely is. A man may recognize cowardice in another while carrying his own fears in a different form. A woman may notice another person's selfishness while remaining blind to the ways her own desires govern her actions. Human weaknesses are remarkably adaptable. When forced from one area of life, they often reappear elsewhere wearing a different disguise. This is why genuine wisdom tends to produce humility rather than arrogance. The more deeply a person understands himself, the less eager he becomes to place himself above others. He begins to realize that the flaws he observes are not foreign species existing in other people. They belong to the same human condition that exists within himself. The mentally strong person understands that seeing clearly is not the same as standing apart. He recognizes that awareness provides information, not moral superiority. It reveals reality without automatically assigning value to one's own position within it. There is another reason judgment is dangerous. It often closes the door to understanding. Once we have decided that another person's weakness makes them inferior, curiosity disappears. We stop asking why they struggle. We stop considering the fears, wounds, experiences, and pressures that may contribute to their behavior. This does not mean excusing harmful actions or pretending that destructive habits are harmless. Understanding is not the same as approval. One can recognize a fault without celebrating it. One can acknowledge a weakness without condemning the entire person. The strongest minds are often those that hold both truths simultaneously. They see reality honestly while resisting the temptation to reduce people to their failures. They understand that every individual is more complicated than the worst thing they have done, just as they are more complicated than the best thing they have done. Mental strength therefore requires more than perception. It requires restraint. It demands the ability to observe without rushing to condemn. It asks a person to remain honest without becoming cruel, discerning without becoming cynical, and realistic without becoming self-righteous. For it is entirely possible to become skilled at recognizing weakness, while remaining blind to the pride that develops from recognizing it. The mind may become sharper while the heart becomes harder. One may learn to identify every flaw in the room while overlooking the quiet satisfaction that comes from believing oneself above those flaws. Growth is often imagined as an addition to life. People think of it as gaining new abilities, acquiring greater confidence, developing stronger habits, or achieving higher goals. While all of these things may occur, growth is just as much a process of separation as it is a process of acquisition. Something is gained, but something is also left behind. This truth is rarely discussed because separation is uncomfortable. Human beings naturally prefer to think about progress in terms of what they will receive rather than what they must release. Yet every meaningful transformation creates a distance between who a person was and who he is becoming. Mental strength accelerates this process. As the mind becomes more disciplined and more honest, old patterns begin to lose their hold. Habits that once felt normal start to feel restrictive. Ways of thinking that once provided comfort begin to appear inadequate. Excuses that once seemed convincing become difficult to believe. At first, this change may seem entirely positive. There is relief in escaping certain limitations. There is satisfaction in overcoming weaknesses that once controlled one's decisions. Yet growth quickly introduces a more complicated experience. The person who changes is often surprised to discover that his relationship with the familiar also changes. Consider how much of daily life is governed by repetition. People tend to revisit the same thoughts, respond to problems in the same ways, and maintain the same emotional habits for years. Familiarity creates a sense of stability. Even unhealthy patterns can feel secure simply because they are known. Mental strength begins to challenge this security. The stronger mind becomes less willing to act automatically. It questions assumptions that once went unchallenged. It examines reactions that once seemed inevitable. It asks whether old habits deserve continued loyalty. As these questions multiply, a separation occurs between the individual and the patterns that once defined him. A person who once sought constant approval may begin valuing integrity more than acceptance. Someone who once avoided discomfort at all costs may discover that discomfort is often the doorway to growth. An individual who once measured success by external recognition may begin caring more about character than applause. These changes seem internal, yet their effects extend outward. The way a person relates to the world inevitably shifts when the principles guiding his life begin to change. Activities that once consumed attention may lose their appeal. Endless distractions can start to feel empty. Conversations centered entirely on complaint or gossip may become difficult to tolerate. The individual finds himself drawn toward different priorities, different questions, and different pursuits. This transition can create an unexpected sense of loneliness, not because growth requires isolation, but because transformation often occurs before new connections have fully formed. The old patterns no longer fit, yet the new ones have not become completely established. Many people become discouraged during this stage because they mistake separation for loss. They assume something has gone wrong simply because they no longer enjoy what once satisfied them. They feel disconnected from familiar routines and conclude that growth has made life worse. In reality, this discomfort is often evidence that change is occurring. A child who outgrows old clothes does not view the process as betrayal. The garments served their purpose for a season, but they no longer fit the person he has become. In a similar way, certain patterns belong to earlier stages of development. They may have provided comfort, identity, or protection at one time. Yet there comes a point when continuing to cling to them prevents further growth. The difficulty lies in accepting that progress sometimes feels like loss before it feels like gain. Mental strength requires a willingness to endure this tension. It asks a person to leave behind habits that once felt safe, without always knowing exactly what will replace them. It demands faith in principles rather than immediate rewards. This is one reason genuine growth cannot be measured solely by visible achievements. The deeper transformation occurs beneath the surface. It is found in the gradual abandonment of attitudes that no longer serve truth. It is found in the quiet refusal to return to patterns that once dictated behavior. The strongest individuals are not merely those who build new disciplines. They are often those who learn to release old attachments. They understand that every step forward creates distance from something behind them. Every act of courage weakens the influence of fear. Every moment of honesty weakens the influence of self-deception. Every decision guided by principle weakens the pull of convenience. The person who becomes mentally stronger does not simply add new qualities to his life. He slowly separates himself from ways of thinking that once seemed inseparable from who he was. The familiar begins to lose its authority, and patterns that once felt permanent start to reveal themselves as choices that can no longer command unquestioned loyalty. Perhaps the greatest surprise awaiting those who pursue mental strength is not what they discover about the world, nor what they discover about other people, but what they discover about themselves. Most begin the journey believing that strength will provide clarity about external things. They expect to understand life better, navigate challenges more effectively, and recognize the motives and behaviors of those around them. What they often fail to anticipate is that increased clarity rarely stops at the boundaries of other people. Eventually, it turns inward. There is a natural tendency within every human being to maintain a favorable image of himself. We prefer to think of our motives as pure, our intentions as honorable, and our shortcomings as understandable exceptions rather than enduring patterns. This tendency is not always conscious. In many cases, it operates quietly beneath the surface, shaping the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Mental strength begins to interfere with these stories. The same honesty that allows a person to see through excuses in others gradually starts exposing excuses within himself. The same awareness that reveals fear in other people's decisions begins revealing fear hidden beneath his own choices. The same standards applied to the outside world return with uncomfortable force toward the person holding them. This is where many individuals encounter a truth they would rather avoid. It is often easier to recognize weakness in others than to acknowledge it within oneself. Observing another person's pride requires far less courage than confronting one's own. Identifying someone else's self-deception is simpler than admitting the ways one has been deceiving oneself. The mind naturally resists such discoveries. It prefers explanations that preserve self-respect. It seeks interpretations that minimize responsibility. It searches for reasons why its own failures should be treated differently from the failures it notices in others. Yet mental strength depends upon resisting this temptation. A person cannot become genuinely strong while demanding honesty from the world and granting exceptions to himself. The pursuit of truth eventually requires equal scrutiny in both directions. The standards applied outward must also be applied inward. This process can be unsettling because it reveals how deeply certain weaknesses are woven into one's character. Some fears that appeared conquered merely changed their form. Some insecurities that seemed absent were simply hidden beneath achievements. Some desires that seemed noble contained elements of vanity that had gone unnoticed. The discovery is rarely dramatic. It does not usually arrive as a single moment of revelation. More often, it unfolds gradually through countless small observations. A person notices that his desire to be respected sometimes disguises a need for approval. He notices that his criticism of others occasionally emerges from frustration with himself. He notices that some of his strongest opinions are defended less by evidence than by pride. He notices that what he once called caution may sometimes be fear, and what he once called confidence may sometimes be stubbornness. These realizations are uncomfortable because they challenge the image a person has constructed of himself. Yet they also provide something invaluable. They replace illusion with reality. There is a peculiar freedom that comes from seeing oneself honestly. The individual no longer spends so much energy protecting a false image. He becomes less concerned with appearing strong because he is more interested in becoming strong. He becomes less invested in defending every mistake because he recognizes that admitting weakness is often the first step toward overcoming it. This honesty creates a different relationship with failure as well. Instead of viewing mistakes as threats to identity, they become opportunities for understanding. Instead of treating flaws as evidence of worthlessness, they become areas requiring attention and growth. Such a person develops a quieter form of confidence. It is not based upon believing he has no weaknesses. It is based upon knowing that he is willing to face them. He no longer depends upon flattering illusions for stability because his sense of worth is not built upon perfection. The strongest minds often possess this quality. They are not individuals who have eliminated every fault from their character. They are individuals who have stopped hiding from those faults. They understand that self-knowledge is not a destination reached once and forever. It is an ongoing discipline requiring humility, courage, and honesty. For every layer of growth reveals another layer of the self. Every increase in awareness uncovers assumptions that previously escaped notice. Every step toward truth illuminates areas that remained hidden in darkness. The person who becomes mentally strong eventually realizes that the most difficult truths are rarely the ones discovered about the world. The most difficult truths are often the ones discovered when the light of awareness finally falls upon the parts of oneself that had long survived by remaining unseen.